Okay. So, welcome everybody. We are beginning to work with a number of lectures that are published in a little book on basically the method of transforming the lower self called Fear No Evil. And I think this will be a good, continuation from where we were working in the book on the pathwork of self-transformation. And those are still available on the YouTube channel. For new people in general to this, there's a little introduction about this as we go through. I'm going to read some of this introduction that was written by Donovan Thasinga, who is a long-term New Evo, was a long-term student of the pathwork as well as many other spiritual paths, but also was the founder of Seven Oaks and the Mid-Atlantic Pathwork. So, and I think, he particularly had a certain appreciation of these lectures that were connected with this work of transforming the lower self. So I'm going to begin his introduction. Says, human nature, this is a quote from C.G. Jung, human nature is capable of an infinite amount of evil. Today, as never before, it is important that human beings should not overlook the danger of the evil lurking within them. It is unfortunately all too real, which is why psychology must insist on the reality of evil and must reject any definition that regards it as insignificant or actually non-existent. And then from the Pathwork Guide, which is a slightly different take on all of this, but this is what we'll be going into. He said, the guide says, when evil is understood to be intrinsically a divine energy flow, momentarily distorted due to specific wrong ideas, concepts, and imperfections, then it is no longer rejected in its essence. It's from the lecture, The Meaning of Evil and Its Transcendence, which is in this book. So, you are not an evil person. I am not an evil person, yet evil exists in the world. Where does it come from? Who is evil, and how did they get that way? The evil things that are done on earth are done by human beings. We can't blame the existence of evil on the plants or animals. We can't imagine that evil is some sort of disease that infects us. We can't honestly say that evil is due to pernicious influences from outer space. Evil things are done by human beings. But is there an evil force that tempts human beings and pulls them into depravity? Is there, for example, a devil? All medieval Christians believed in the devil, and many present-day Christians still do. Hollywood movies feature him frequently. The followers of Carl Jung would probably say that there are among all the many archetypes some that are evil, either in their intent or in their effect. One point of view is that there are disincarnate spirits that have evil intent and tempt humans to commit evil. However, it is also said that these negative spirits can only influence those who have weakness in some area already, and who therefore, in a sense, are open to being tempted. Or, in other words, even if there are evil spirits, they do not cause evil. What does then? Some have denied the existence of evil and have said that apparently evil acts are really just the result of misguidedness. Can this be true? Is it possible that no one has evil in them? Let us look at the Holocaust of Hitler's Germany and examine what we find there. What was the essence of what took place during the Holocaust? Men and women planned the extermination of millions of other men and women and children, and then carried it out with ruthless efficiency. Whatever their supposed justifications, they slaughtered their fellow human beings, stole their property, and then proclaimed their righteousness about having done it. These were actions of unprecedented evil. And those who followed orders, the Adolf Eichmanns of the world, must have had a moral blindness to evil to be able cold-heartedly to carry out such evil orders. To describe these events as misguided seems thin and insufficient as an explanation. We began this introduction by assuring ourselves that neither you nor I are evil. But then, who is? And how does an evil person get that way? Does evil exist only in other places, such as Nazi Germany or the evil empire of the Soviet Union? Or only in the hearts of criminals and drug lords, but not in the hearts of anyone we know? Who is evil? What is evil? And should I be concerned about it? Please read again the quote from Carl Jung that begins this section. Today, as never before, it is important that human beings should not overlook the dangers of the evil lurking within them. Notice that Jung seems to be saying that evil lurks within all human beings. Can this possibly be so? Evil is a very strong word. Most people want to reserve this word for the Hitlers and the criminals of the world. They do not want to apply it to themselves. Does it apply to you and me? The first definition of evil given by my dictionary is morally reprehensible, sinful, wicked. This definition makes it clear that it is an inappropriate use of the word to speak of the evils of disease and death. Disease and death are painful aspects of human existence, but they are certainly not morally reprehensible. On the other hand, it is a correct use of the word to speak of the evil institution of slavery. Let's look at the phrase from the dictionary, morally reprehensible. I have done things that are morally reprehensible, and I strongly suspect that so have you. We all have character flaws. We all are more or less egocentric, selfish, and petty. And these character flaws have led me many times to be unloving, spiteful, jealous, and to act in ways that only add to the sum total of distress in the world. But does this make me evil? You and I are certainly not evil in our totality or in our essence, but we do have evil within us. The pathwork teaches that evil, or a tendency to evil, resides in each and every human soul. To put it another way, evil in the world is nothing more than the sum total of the evil tendencies that exist in all human beings. Hence, from this point of view, the word evil can describe a continuum of behavior that goes all the way from simple pettiness and egocentricity on one hand to the genocidal sadism of Nazism on the other. Those of us who predominantly inhabit the lower end of the spectrum may wish to say we have nothing in common with the murderers at the high end. Yet can it be true that we have nothing in common with them? To use the second of these dictionary synonyms, are we not all sinners? 30 or 40 years ago, the word sin was still in common use. But save among the fundamentalists, it is scarcely ever used anymore. Now we are more likely to use the terminology of psychology, which talks instead about our human faults and failings, but usually in ways that put the blame elsewhere, on parents or society, for making us the way we are. According to this school of thought, personal change then happens when we understand the source of the negative programming others have done to us, feel all the feelings involved, primarily anger and grief, and then forgive the outer source of the negativity we still suffer from. However, in the psychological view, we have lost something that the old religious idea of sin gave to us, namely that we are responsible for our own negativity, our personal acts of omission and commission. Being responsible is quite different from being guilty. It means simply acknowledging ourselves as sometimes the source of pain, injustice, and uncaring towards ourselves, others, and the world. If I can assent to this degree of self-responsibility, that I am not merely a victim of the evil in the world, but that I am in my own way an initiator of negativity, I have already made an enormous step in the direction of transforming my negativity. Once I have made this huge first step, what follows? What can I do next to transform the tendencies to evil that lie within me? Both religion and psychology have attempted to answer this question. Traditional religion gives us moral precepts to live by. So I'm going to pause here a minute. I forgot how long this was and just see. I mean, let's go ahead. There's a lot being covered. And so, any comments or questions? How is this landing? Does it make sense to you? Not like it. How's it? Does it?
I think it's kind of interesting that we're not reading the guide's words right now. We've read the guide's
Yes.
words for so many years. All of a
Yeah.
sudden we're reading Donovan's words, you know?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And we will get to the guide's words, but it's a pretty small chapter. And I thought this was a pretty interesting introduction that, kind of helped, frame this approach. So, and then this whole book, with many chapters, and it starts with, some of the earlier things. So, it's kind of a work in, like, to get the full picture of it, hopefully you'll join me for more. But this, I think, yeah. So, I mean, and it is kind of like maybe it's older, like, I think more people are aware of their shadow to some degree now, or, this kind of thing. I remember when I first came into the path work, I mean, especially in group, because the shame of exposure and all of that, and I was just terrified, of my lower self, and I had no idea what it was, but I didn't want to, I was scared to know. I was scared for other people to see it, that kind of thing. And it took me like 5 years in the program before I even began to kind of recognize what he's saying here. And I feel like, hopefully it's easier now, but I think this is very sensitive material for us because, our ego has such difficulty with blame and shame. And, so it's kind of like that's actually an aspect of the defense system and in a sense part of the lower self. But, like I think it, and then where, we look around us in today's world where there is just so much, exposure of evil, and coarseness and crassness and, negativity. And I think there is a kind of spiritual cosmic reason for this, that it really is a giant core class, and that everything is coming to the light and we have to see our own duality and recognize it. Certainly we see it in each other. And then the question is, can we find it and transform it in ourselves? Because that's where we can make a difference for the collective as well, and also a huge difference in our lives. So that's, anybody else have any reaction to any of this? So it helps, and it's fine for people not to, but it helps often. And I think it's good to have a kind of, give and take a little. And so feel free to break in, and if something occurs to you as we're reading, that you want to comment on or question.
I was going to say that, I can feel him heading towards cause and effect and self-responsibility. But there's something that I've witnessed and have witnessed before, is that people attach themselves to certain healing possibilities, or let's say methods. Like, I had a conversation with somebody who had come through AA recently, and I started talking about pathwork, and I could almost like visually see this wall go up in front of him. Like, I got my AA thing here, don't try to be chipping away at my AA thing with your self-responsibility and ultimate, and cause and effect, because that's like, you know, that's not in my AA thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because I mean, I think there is like there's actually a pathwork version of the 12 steps, and it's very, compatible. And in the early days, we had a lot of people that came in through AA, but they were people that were ready for a next level,
Yeah.
of the work. And yeah, sort of beginning AAers, I think. And but you're right, like everybody has their little, area. And something I've always liked about the path work, I mean, like it's my area too, but I like it because it does incorporate a lot of other things, and there's a lot of other things that take it and go deeper in certain areas than the actual path work does. So, pretty much, I would always invite people to, follow what makes sense. And that's what the guide is saying too, try this on for size, see if it resonates, and so, I think it is, just a way that we can, like the guide sort of always brings in sort of the whole sort of thing and then brings it down to the individual situation.
Hmm.
And so, yeah.
So I've got a, I'm brand new to this, so I won't try to, I'm not, I'll try to say what I'm trying to say, but I don't know that it'll come out that way. But first and foremost, I've lived a life of nothing but probably low end evil, I guess, or maybe medium evil. I don't know. And that's fine. But then I've also had really good things too. But where I am these days is I'm just not assigning any real value to it. I'm not, whether it be good or whether it be like things that I did. And I can look at some of the things I did and be like, wow, that's just so far from like, I can't really even see that as being, I mean, certainly not, I'm not taking responsibility for things. And certainly I look at it, but what I'm trying to do these days is just not assign value. It's just it is. And the things that I say are evil, there may be somebody next to me that says, well, what you did was really not that evil. And there might be somebody on the other side that says, wow, what you did was like incredibly evil. Like, and so just for me, and what's brought me here to Pathwork and through my journey as of late, is just this freeing ability to sort of separate, I guess, on a different, I don't know, I don't want to say plane. Maybe I do want to say plane. It's not it's not higher, it's just different. And being able to kind of look at it from a, maybe from a kind of, I guess as people say, 30,000 foot view, and just
Yeah.
not a sign of, there is evil for sure. But I don't know, this is where I am. And I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody. It's good for me to talk about, I guess.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, what you're saying, I think, is there's different levels even of that, so there's a lecture in here around, not identifying. And then the quote that we read is saying, like that, when we look at it a certain way, we have a deeper understanding of it all, and so perspective, is great. And then there's sometimes a kind of withdrawal, but there's sometimes just an evolution. And it sounds like, like we go through like our life journey, our soul journey takes us through these things for us to make a choice. And when we've made a clear choice that that's not really what we want, and we're no longer addicted to it or acting it out in many ways, or even sometimes when we are, it's like it's just reflecting back to us, okay, this is still with us, and just becomes the breadcrumbs of our spiritual development and our path. And so, it's not about judgment or evaluation, and it certainly can be about, having a perspective that, doesn't personally identify with all of it, but recognizes that who you really are, is the light you brought to the planet, this, 50-50 proposition of your light plus, your darkness, and kind of the whole purpose, according to the Pathwork Guide, is that, the soul, comes in with that balance, in order to be, faced with the negativities and move through them, transform them, clear them, heal them, right? And so that is the evolutionary journey, because the guide says, you know what, we already are the light. We just have all of these kind of God opposed layers on top of us. So part of what I'm hearing you say is that, you know, you're more maybe trying, you know, like identifying more with the objective observer, with, you know, the acceptance of what is and surrender, and, you know, still, you know, paying attention, learning, you know, and so we can, you know, still, you know, notice when we get triggered or when our heart's closed or whatever, because I think we're continually sort of expanding our capacity for our higher self to incarnate within us. And to do that, you know, we have to recognize and work with these other parts. But we don't have to feel bad about them, which is part of what I'm hearing you say, right? So
Yeah, and not in a way that I don't recognize that what I did was, in my mind, not great. So
yeah, and
I don't want to feel like I'm not taking responsibility. I just,
right, that's remorse, you know, recognizing and taking responsibility, you know, like that you had an element of, you know, energy, dense negative, whatever, you know, that you know was, you know, part of, you know, I mean, when we work them back, we always see where they're connected to our, you know, wounds and our images and that kind of thing. But you know, it still means that when they express through us, they have impact. And so we can take responsibility, even if we didn't have intent, for the impact. And certainly, if we had intent, to pay attention, you know, to notice where was our intention, you know, to cut them off or, you know, assault them in some way, right? You know, like, or disconnect from the heart, basically. Because when we're connected to the heart, we don't naturally do any of this. But when we're in fear, when we're in pride, when we're in self-will, you know, we close that heart connection and, you know, oftentimes act. And so we're just, you know, taking responsibility and then, you know, not dwelling on it, but seeking to understand it more deeply, seeking, you know, to you know, practice, you know, sort of supporting ourselves, because usually when that happens, something got stirred up inside from like an inner vulnerable place that needs support. And so we can also go in and take responsibility that way by showing up for the part that's been, you know, triggered, and not making it bad or wrong, but trying to help it, right? So that's a whole other way of looking at self-responsibility as well. Okay, so we're almost done with this part of it and get into the lecture, but let's continue. So he says, traditional religion gives us moral precepts to live by, such as do unto others as you would have them do unto you, love thy neighbor as thyself. Surely we can all agree that if everyone abided by these golden rules, the world would be a much more pleasant place in which to live. But we do not often abide by them. I do not, and you do not. If we accept the principle as valid, why is it so hard to live up to? How do I go about changing my behavior? What do I need to do to become more loving? The answer of traditional religion too often seems to be merely try harder. In traditional religion, in the words of Carl Jung, every effort is made to teach idealistic beliefs or conduct which people know in their hearts they can never live up to. And such ideals are preached by officials who know that they themselves have never lived up to these high standards and never will. What is more, nobody ever questions the value of this kind of teaching. The answers of traditional religion have been so disappointing that many people who would formerly have consulted a priest now go instead to see a psychotherapist. How successful this modern psychology has been in grappling with the problem of evil. An article about Abraham Maslow, the father of humanistic psychology, states, in his last years, Maslow was grappling with the nature of human evil. He expressed misgivings over the inability of humanistic and transpersonal psychology to assimilate our dark side, what Jung termed the shadow. into a comprehensive theory of human nature. Maslow himself found this a troubling issue and came to no final conclusions by the time of his death. Those of us who have studied and practiced the pathwork have discovered, with a sense of relief, that these teachings provide the crucial missing link that has heretofore eluded both religion and psychology. The vast majority of present-day spiritual literature focuses on the essential goodness of human beings, on our ultimate God self, nature, and this is certainly a valuable message for our time. But what are we to make of our dark side? Where does it come from? Why is it so intractable? How are we to deal with it? It is in providing answers to these questions that the message of the Pathwork has its unique value. So this wisdom teaches us that evil can be found in some form in the heart of every human being, but that it need not be feared and denied. A method is given by which we can see our dark side clearly, understand its roots and causes, and most important, transform it. The results will be peace in the human heart, and only after this is achieved will there be peace on earth. So there's a little bit here on the pathwork, but since I guess most of us know it, I will just go through it. And if new people are coming, they can maybe pause on these frames and read it themselves to learn a little bit more. Okay, so this is the first part, and this is Donovan again doing a little introduction, so bear with me. Again, quoting from Meister Eckhart. A man has many skins in himself, covering the depths of his heart. I like it that we have all of these different quotes. Man knows so many things he does not know himself. Why 30 or 40 skins or hides, just like an ox's or a bear's, so thick and hard cover the soul? Go into your own ground and learn to know yourself there. And then from Jung, it is often tragic to see how blatantly a man bungles his own life and the lives of others, yet remains totally incapable of seeing how much the whole tragedy originates in himself, and how he continually feeds it and keeps it going. Not consciously, of course, for consciously he is engaged in a bewailing, a faithless world that recedes further and further into the distance. Rather, it is an unconscious factor which spins the illusions that veil his world. So chapter 1 is an excerpt of one of the earliest Pathwork lectures. The lecture concerns happiness, noting that it is something that we all long for, while tending to blame outer circumstances for any feelings of unhappiness we may have. The lecture immediately sets forth the doctrine of self-responsibility. The spiritually immature person thinks that happiness has to be created outside first, that outer circumstances, not necessarily dependent on him, have to fit his wishes, and then inner happiness will follow. The spiritually mature know that it is exactly the other way around, and happiness does not depend on outer circumstances or people, no matter how convinced the spiritually immature person may be of this fallacy. The spiritually mature person knows that he himself is capable of creating a happy life, not only first within himself, but as an inevitable result of this, also without. This doctrine is the first foundation stone on which the Pathwork method of self-transformation is based. It does not require that one believe this in order to begin doing the work, but it is necessary to at least open one's mind to the possibility that this could be true. Toward this idea, as toward many others that follow, we are urged to put aside old certainties and open our minds to new possibilities. This path does not require that we believe any specific dogmas or subscribe to any creeds. Rather, we are given ideas and methods to try, to work with, to put into practice. If the methods work, we will know it by its result. If the ideas bear fruit, if they help us to understand ourselves better and live more happily and productively, then they will become truly ours. They will be known, not just believed. The first key to happiness is self-knowledge. This would seem to be an incontroversial statement. Surely all educated people would agree that self-knowledge is invaluable. But why then is it so difficult to attain? Perhaps because no one likes to hear unpleasant or unflattering truths about oneself. And yet these are the most important ones to know. The lectures that follow in part 1 point out how important it is for us to know all of these parts of ourselves. So from the guide, chapter 1, know yourself. deep within the heart of each human being is the longing for happiness. Now, what is happiness? If you ask different people, you will receive different answers. The spiritually immature, after thinking about it for some time, will say, perhaps, that if they had this or that fulfillment, or a worry eliminated, they would be happy. In other words, happiness means for them that certain wishes are gratified. Yet if even these wishes came true, these people would not be happy. They would still feel a certain deep-seated unrest. Why? Because happiness does not depend on outer circumstances or other people, no matter how convinced the spiritually immature person is of this fallacy. Spiritually mature people know this. So I want to just pause here, because sometimes the guide uses these terms like immaturity and maturity, and our minds can easily hear that as a judgment and a critique inside. And so if you notice you're cringing a little bit in this, or, I'm noticing I am a little, like, that's always my sign, that I'm interpreting these words in a way that the guide really isn't intending, like, that I don't know if you can hear in my voice, but he really, if you can feel the energy that's channeled here, he really has no judgment. It's kind of a simple truth. And so it's not a judgment that a person is immature. It's just a fact that a person is young. Like we wouldn't judge a 2-year-old for not being a 12-year-old. Right. And so we do have, certainly a responsibility to try to grow and maintain maturity. And sometimes we shirk this responsibility in our life. But, it's like, again, all souls are considered absolutely beloved and of pure light, the spark of the divine, by all the angels and other beings. There's a certain, appreciation and full love of humanity as a kind of divine presence. And so even when our divine presence is covered over by our lower self in some way, this is understood in the spiritual realms, and only, love and support is pouring to us, even for the consequences that these things create in us and the suffering that we bear because of them. So there's a great compassion, and often also, a great deal of grace that happens that we're not even aware of, that also is connected to our own divinity in our lives. But, it's important to, just kind of notice if you're having a reaction to any of the guide's words. It helps to kind of step back and look at that as well. So they know that they are capable of creating happy life, first within themselves, but then also inevitably in their outer life. The spiritually immature think that happiness has to be created first on the outer level, because outer circumstances, which are not necessarily brought about by them, have to fit their wishes. And when this is achieved, happiness will follow. The spiritually mature know that it is exactly the other way around. Many people do not want to acknowledge this truth. It is easier to blame fate, the injustice of destiny and higher powers, or circumstances brought about by other people, than it is to be self-responsible. And in this way, I think we might get into this later on in the lecture, but just, like, we think of self-responsibility as just, like managing our lives and controlling, our outer expressions and, things like that. But the guide is really using this term, almost in a quantum way, like where, like, literally our thoughts and our, inner psychic dynamisms do actually draw to, magnetize, attract, manifest, create our outer circumstances, right? And so when we're having difficult outer circumstances, oftentimes, it is the natural tendency, and myself included, to, sort of feel like that is the issue. And so this is, again, looking more deeply in a deeper level of self-introspection to see if we can discover how somehow in our inner psychic spaces, the state of our inner soul, we might have drawn to us or manifested, that these people, these experiences, these difficulties. And so, it helps to sort of look at it in this larger context as well. It is easier to feel like a victim. That way, one does not have to search, sometimes very deeply, and with a maximum of honesty within oneself. And yet the great truth is, happiness lies in our own hands. It is in your power to find happiness. You may ask, what must I do? But let us first see what happiness means in the spiritually mature sense. And this is something that is also a kind of beautiful, huge leap that, is sometimes hard to grasp completely, but has a lot within it. So he's saying it simply means God. It simply means that connection to God. Many people, in all sincerity, endeavor to find God. However, if they were asked exactly what that meant, what they meant by that, how they imagined it to take place, it would be difficult for them to give a meaningful answer. Yet, of course, there is such a thing as finding God. In truth, this is a very concrete process. There is nothing hazy, unrealistic, or illusory about it. Finding God really means finding the real self. If you find yourself to some degree, you are in comparative harmony. You perceive and understand the laws of the universe. You are capable of relating and loving and experiencing joy. You are truly self-responsible. You have the integrity and courage to be yourself, even at the expense of giving up approval. All of that signifies your having found God, by whatever name this process may be designated. It might also be called coming home from self-alienation. So let me pause here. Any comments, questions? I find, like there's two ideas that are here, like finding God is like finding our real self. And part of that real self is our true higher self, right? Our the spark that is our divinity and is the source of everything that we really need inside of ourselves. But there's this Ken Wilber understanding that I like a lot, that, he says we should have all three gods. Like he talks about, we have a first person God, that's the God inside of us. We have a second person God, that's kind of the I, thou God relationship. And then there's a third person God, which is kind of like the Holy Spirit within all things, or the unfolding of the universe and God in history, in our experience, in our immediate, even the way we're projecting and attracting to us and creating, in a sense, is, our curricula, and is God coming to us in that way as we're exploring all of this. And so, the one that I think a lot of more mature spiritual seekers have given up is the second person God. They can get with the God within and maybe even the third person God. But there is a way that also, I think, in our inner being as humans on the planet, we're always going to feel small in the face of, like complexity, and, it is a planet where there is pleasure and pain, all of these things, it's kind of, to me, life is an initiation, not a vacation, right? So it is about pleasure, but it's also about, finding our way, going into and then out of the underworld. And so when we are in those journeys, we need a connection with the spiritual realms, I think, for help. And so that means we need the connection with higher self, because that's also how we can connect. But, there are other beings, just like there are, negative specialists and dark beings maybe that can attract or attach to us. There are also our guardian angels and all the angelic qualities, all the divine qualities of the universe are really energetic signatures that can come into us if we learn to ask and be receptive and receive them. And so those energies can hold us and help us and guide us in so many ways. And in a way that requires this kind of asking, and because they are not allowed to kind of interfere with us if we don't ask, because of our free will. And so when we pray to God, when we seek a connection with God, that may seem sort of more like the old father mother God, we can see it not as the only form of God, or just the old man with the beard up in the sky, but we can see it as sort of the divine archetypes, the archetypes of the divine mother and the divine father, and all of the divine beings that we need, right, for our own support and guidance and growth. So, and then where he says it might also be called coming home from self-alienation. This is a very big topic that I hope we can really unpack and begin to understand as we go. But because of our wounding in childhood, we basically created a false self, and we kind of put it on the throne of God. And so then we have this difficult disconnection from our real self that really is part of this self-knowledge, and then we have to go in and reconnect to that authentic real self, including our lower self, right, including our shadow. And from there we can let go of the masks and the idealized self-images and that kind of thing that create an experience within us of our own self-alienation. We are turned against ourselves inside of ourselves. And that's one of our biggest struggles. So finding God is the only way happiness can be found. And how can it be found right here and right now? How, you may then ask. My friends, so often people imagine God is immeasurably distant in the universe and impossible to reach. This is far from the truth. The whole universe is within each person. Therefore, God is within each person. Each living creature has a part of God within. So it's like a holographic, right? The only way to reach this divine part within is on the steep and narrow path of self-development. The goal is perfection. And that term, might have a, because it's not in that same kind of high bar perfectionism that mostly the ego gets into. But the goal is perfection. In the Bible, Jesus, it's often interpreted, there's a quote of Jesus that says, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." But I had read that the original translation is closer to, "Be whole as your Father in heaven is whole." So I think, that's more of the understanding of this perfection. The basis of this is to know yourself. To know yourself is indeed difficult, for knowing oneself means to face many an unflattering trait. It means a long, continuous, never-ending search. It's kind of like it develops our humility, right? and that's really, like the healthy antidote to our pride and shame. And so there's also, even a stretching and a development, as we do this, and can, humble ourselves, and not feel like if we're not perfect, we're not good enough, or we die, or we're, at the end of the world. So what am I? What do my reactions, not only my deeds and thoughts, really mean? Are my actions supported by my feelings, or do I have motives behind these actions that do not correspond to what I like to believe about myself, or what I like other people to believe? Have I been honest with myself so far? What are my mistakes? Although some of you may know your weaknesses, most people ignore a good part of them. They're below the radar most of the time. And this presents a great hurdle, even for those who have reached a certain height on this upward path. You know, there are certain ones that are harder for us to face and see. You cannot overcome what you do not know. So that's really the divinity of, you know, this awareness of the light shining on our darkness, right? So each fault is nothing more or less than a chain that binds you. By the shedding of each imperfection, you break a chain and thus become freer and nearer to happiness. And this is really, freedom is a very interesting thing, you know, like this is really, we were born with free will. We're meant to be free. And there's a way that we are enslaved to a lot of these defenses and egoic things. And so a part of this, you know, journey of self-transformation and transforming the lower self is to free ourselves. And, you know, happiness comes with freedom and is meant for each individual. But it is impossible to attain without eliminating the cause of your unhappiness, which are your faults, as well as any trends that break a spiritual law. You can find out how advanced you are on this path by viewing your life and your problems. How happy are you? What is lacking in your life? To the extent that unhappiness or discontent exists in your life, you have not fulfilled your potential. And oftentimes, you know, we feel that inside, and it's part of our self-recrimination and our self-churning and self-judgment, right? You know, but that doesn't help us. So, you know, it's good to know and understand that there really is just this, you know, discontent because there's a higher call, there's an evolution that's trying to happen, you know. It's not that we're bad, right? And for those who, you know, really fulfill themselves, there will be a deep and peaceful contentment, security, and a sense of fulfillment. If these are lacking, you are not completely on the right path or have not reached the liberation you are bound to experience after the initial difficulties on this path are overcome. And it's a gradual path. It's not an overnight path. And only you will know the answer about where you stand. No one else can or need answer this question for you. If you are on the right path, however, and you have that deep feeling of contentment and fulfillment, yet there are still outer problems in your life, that should not discourage you. We can have both and it's very important that we allow that stage, you know, to go where we can really see that, you know, we are basically happy and we can still go into discontentment and suffering, you know, of our own making in a lot of situations. But, you know, that we're already evolving to the degree that we, you know, really have that more a feeling of contentment and happiness. And for the outer form of the inner conflict you may be working on right now, that cannot be dissolved so quickly, right? So, you know, again, it's a lot of both ends. It's a lot of healing of duality. It's a lot of accepting reality, kind of like what Franklin was saying, you know, like, you know, it's like the guide talks a lot about how the ego kind of gets caught up into the trauma of things. And it's like over emotional in certain situations. It awfulizes in the stories, you know, it says it's going to happen. It's going to be this way forever. You know, it has these kind of thinking patterns that, you know, are when we get involved with them, it sweeps us up and it prevents that perspective that you were talking about. And so, you know, in that little handbook, Messiah's handbook, you know, I guess it's the Reluctant Messiah in the handbook. There's a quote that says something like, now I forgot what it was. Oh, well, let me get back to the lecture. So the more you direct the inner soul currents into the right channels, the more the respective outside forms will change gradually but surely. Until this process is completely affected, the outer problems cannot automatically dissolve. Impatience will only be a hindrance. If you are on the right path, you will live and feel the great reality of God's world in your daily life. It will become just as real, if not more so, than your human surroundings. It will no longer be a theory, mere intellectual knowledge. You will live in this world and feel its effects on you. I will retire now and say to each one of you, none of you should ever feel alone. The love of God is with all of you. Be in peace. Follow this path. It will bring you happiness. Okay. So, like I said, it's a little earlier than we usually close. That's a short excerpt of a lecture. So, is there any more commentary? Any questions? Any more discussion of all of this? How did it land? How was it for you, Skylar? You've been quiet there.
Yeah, it was a good one. I think it's just very much fundamental, and I definitely just made me sort of realize of why I'm on this path. Kind of just, or I guess when it all started, why why I started going into this, following this pathway, and truly it's just not finding happiness, and just all of the the being driven by something all the time, and just one goal after another goal, and kind of not getting that fullness. I don't know, it's just kind of like not getting, and then reflecting it back to like when you go in nature and just kind of like I don't know, sort of associating yourself with um was just being part of nature, and where everything else just that you've achieved just falls away, everyone is equal, and nothing really matters what you do at the end of the day. So it's kind of, I think that was very grounding for me when I started, and that led me to this path work, just realizing how important it is to do the inner discovery, to get rid of all the layers, shed them all, and free yourself.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, and most people do, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. People are coming to the path in many levels and lots of, for lots of reasons nowadays, but like a lot, is we're seeking, and the guide says we need pleasure, that's kind of the nature of things. And so like our lecture on, creative emptiness and stuff, I think brought some of that in as well. It's really fundamental. And when we are unhappy and we can't find pleasure, it is like you said, from all of this programming, and all of this way that we've lost ourselves in the midst of the programs. And so it is a long journey, of kind of uncovering ourselves, excavating, learning about ourselves more and seeing, what is the programming and what, is the real self, and looking at all of our questions from our own inner authority, and knowing and balancing the masculine and the feminine, and dynamics, the active and the receptive, and the guide says a lot of our difficulty is because we're active when we need to be receptive, and we're receptive when we need to be active, or we're in distortion, with a kind of passivity or an overactivity. And so there's a balance to these things. And so we can seek to find within ourselves, and reclaim that truth, that balance, that inner connection. And I think a lot of it, again, the happiness is knowing that we are beloved in some way. You may not have all of the fulfillment and all of your potential is kind of found yet, but the biggest, I think, source of our immediate unhappiness is the inner critic within us. And the way that, like even when we feel our unhappiness, we look at it and we judge our unhappiness. And that just spins us into more unhappiness, right? Instead of like being with, oh, I see you, unhappiness, who are you? What do you need? How are you doing? What's going on inside? Right? Like we need to learn to reconnect and re-embrace everything within us in this kind of, inner where our own, presence, our own divine presence in some way shows up in these personality situations, and we can, hold and speak to and work with and, support these places that are suffering inside, and they don't know what to do, and often what they learned kind of helps, but it also creates more of the same. So as we're learning to set ourselves free, it's a big journey. And so I hope, this has been, like it's a beginning introduction. There's a lot more to go. I don't know. The other lectures were sort of a good, support of all of these things. And now we're really kind of taking this dive in this journey of self-transformation. So, hopefully people can continue. Does anybody else want to share or say anything? How Frank, about how this landed for you?
I keep coming back to the word truth. And I just feel that the more I understand my personal truth, the closer I'll get to God, so to speak. The further down the line in the lectures, the guide actually says, God is truth. So it just occurs to me that, the more truth I uncover about myself, the closer I'm going to get to God. And the word happiness is not really it for me. I'm looking for a sense of peace in maybe that's just another word for happiness, but to me it feels different, It's like I want some peace in my soul. And I don't want to wrestle with, what is God? Is God a actual being?
That's just a mental thing.
Is God a figure? Do I have to, when I die, am I
You
going
have to experience God. Those are all mind
Yeah.
questions. You have to
I just,
know heart-wise. Yeah.
yeah, I want the truth to be enough, I want that to be like all I need for the experience of peace in my soul.
Okay. And so what truth do you think might, do that for you? Or have you found any of that truth so far that brings peace to your soul?
Well, the truth is buried in my distortions, there's layers of distortions. Yeah, the best I can do at the moment is I can see it a little more clearly. I can see my distortions a little more clearly. Um, you know, Franklin was speaking about non-attachment. It was what it sounded like to me. He was like, okay, well, I'm just not going to attach myself to the thought that, I was evil in this moment. And because, well, what good is that going to do me? And besides, that was in the past. If I'm being evil in the present, that's a different story. But, if I was evil in the past, what's the point of dwelling in there? So I don't know. It's for me, it's the truth. And can I define the truth at this? No, I only know that it's personal to me. Your truth might be different, you know? Your distortions come from a whole different set of experiences than mine do.
Yeah, and it's the
My
truth.
childhood was different than yours, and the imprint, the blueprint or the imprint that it left in my psyche is a different set of distortions.
Right. But the truth, I think, underlying all of that is ultimately that the universe is, like truth and love. I mean, like the divinity of the universe is the marriage of truth and love.
I'll agree with that.
And so, where we can find those experiences, or have that, clarity, and where we have the clarity, we naturally open our hearts because it's, you know, so beautiful, and where, we have, you see the beauty, the truth affects us and comes in directly. So yeah, and that is the experience of God at some level, and yeah, everybody has a different sense of that, but it is, like, and happiness, like joy, you were saying, you know, like happiness, joy, and peace. I mean, I think those all are important, you know, but like you're saying, for yourself, the personal part of it is really seeking the peace. I think once you had the peace, joy would naturally unfold, you know, that to me, that word joy and happiness are pretty close together. You know, we want to enjoy and we want to have joy, and you know, I think joy is a divine, angelic vibration that is part of our nature.
Yeah, and you know, when we talk about when you talk about the inner critic being the culprit, so to speak, um, I think that when we do that, when we beat up on ourselves, we're actually just beating up on our inner child. It's our inner child that we can't seem to control. You know, it's always be getting
And that's the
triggered.
object, is we got to control everything, right? So
Yeah,
that's the
it's
other
always
thing, is we got to let go of control. That's
yeah,
part of the
the inner
truth.
child is always getting triggered, and we are like ashamed of our inner child getting triggered, so we beat up on our inner child, you know? And that is like not the path. Of course, beating up on your inner child is not the path. I mean, if we could stop doing that, we'd be halfway there.
Exactly. That, and I think you're exactly right. I think it's exactly the halfway mark, and once we can move beyond that, and you know, various of us are in different stages now with that. You know, it took me a long time to move past that, but I recognize the minute that I did was, you know, oh, like this is where stage 2 begins, because up until then you really are dealing at a certain different level of the work, and once that's done, you're now free to learn and grow, and you know, be a child of God. So you know, it's a completely different experience. And also, I think the other thing you were talking about is, like, when you're in your critic, you know, like we contract, you know, like, and and when we're contracting internally, we can't be receptive, right? And in order to feel the love of the angels, the guidance from our higher self, whatever we're seeking, you know, in truth, what we're seeking, what we really need, is part of the truth, right? Is that we have to open and be calm to receive. And that's a part of the muscle that we're trying to develop a little bit, because we usually, you know, do contract, get triggered, you know, and can't then follow this guidance that's a system that we have when we can relax.
Well, one thing's for certain is we all have the same personality parts. We all have an idealized self-image. We all have a lower self. We all have a superficial ego. We all have a wounded child. We're all working with the same parts. You
In
know?
all their various forms, and
Yeah.
and what it, I think ultimately is saying, you know, is that, you know, humanity is also one being, and each one of us is like a subpersonality in the totality of humanity.
Yeah.
So, you know, and part of it is this integration, this reconnection, this bringing back, you know, and weaving back together all that's been separated and split asunder. So, Franklin, any last words here?
So, this may be, I don't know. We'll throw it out there. So I walk my dog every day. Every day I walk my dog. Rain or shine, every morning we're before the sun, walking the dog around the park. And inevitably I'm usually the first person that's there, which is good. You know, it helps me, it just helps me. And so, and then after about halfway through my walk, some other people who show up pretty regularly, and this is typically in the wintertime, because it gets light much later. So some people will start showing up. And this is sort of something I've been trying to bring into my life. So I'll be walking the dog and it'll be pitch black, but it won't be pitch black really. It'll just be dark, but not crazy dark. And people will come, and all of a sudden I'll see them from hundreds of yards away, because they all have a light, a big lamp right on their head, or some people will even walk with their iPhone flashlight or phone flashlight. And it's blinding. It's really blinding. When I look at that light, I'm like, wow, that is so bright. Like, and I've talked to a couple, I don't talk very much at all when I'm sure all these people that see me are like, that guy's the most antisocial person, but I'm just doing my thing. But I've actually talked to a couple people and they're like, yeah, the light is, so I don't see anybody sneaking up on me or, for my safety, And that's fine. And that's good. And I'm not judging that. But for me, when I turn the light off, that's when I see everything.
Yeah.
That's when everything I can see. And the funny, not funny, this one young lady who she had her iPhone and she was like, with the light, and she's like, and I was like 10 feet away from her. She didn't see me. I was like, good morning. And it startled her. She was just like, oh. And I'm like, and I knew that was going to happen. And I was like, I wonder if she'll see that maybe being without that such laser focused bright lights, if you turn it off and you just see everything, your eyes adjust and everything becomes not crystal clear like you see in the day, but it becomes enough to where you can see everything. And in my journey, I try to turn that light off as much as I can. And it can be with spiritual work. It can be with whatever, you name it, ad nauseum. It could be anything. But if I have that light, if I have that really bright lights in the darkness or in the night, I won't even call it darkness because it's not dark. A lot of times it's like crazy light. It's so light outside. So I don't know if any of this makes sense, but when I get that laser focus on whatever it is, I just take a step back, turn the light off, and just receive.
Right.
I see so much more clearly than I could with that direct bright light. And I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody.
No, I mean,
but
you're reminding me. I mean, that's what I teach in forest bathing as well, right? Like there's actually a way that, we do have a kind of pinpoint way of looking at things in nature. So if we're out in the woods and we're walking along, and so I do invite people and, we do a little exercise and sharing about like how indigenous peoples, when they're in the forest, they have this wide angle, soft focus kind of satellite antenna receptivity, right? That just allows, and then from there, they are able to know the slightest movement anywhere in the forest, like they can take in the whole at one
Right.
time instead of sort of like this narrow pinpoint focus. And so exactly the same principle. And it's a good metaphor, a good principle to use, to understand how to work within in ourselves as well. So great. Thank you. Good comment. Okay. Well,
Thank you, Darlene. Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you. See you in 2 weeks, hopefully. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.